You are listening to the 5 a.m. podcast, and today is your day. Welcome to the 5 a.m. podcast, where we bring you insightful conversations with thought leaders and influencers who are making headway and some waves in their callings. In today's episode, we have an extraordinary guest who's challenging how we think about human potential. James Rojas-Taylor is a U.S. Marine Corps veteran and has over 20 years of experience as an actor, producer, and he's the author of All Our Best Selves. James is pioneering what he calls mental and emotional literacy, using acting techniques not just for performance, but as a tool anyone can use to transform their lives. Now, James draws on the revolutionary work of Konstantin Stanislavski, a man who changed mere acting from pretending to authentic becoming. James shows us how these same methods can help us regulate emotions, build empathy, and access all of our human potential. As he often says, we don't have one mind or set of emotions for entertainment and another for real life. So today, we'll explore how acting techniques can give us an operating system for the most powerful supercomputer known, the human brain. But before we dive into this conversation, please share this with your friends and networks. I know many are going to enjoy this conversation. And as the algorithms and analytics tell us, we have listeners beyond the North American continent, so thank you to those in Denmark or Dubai and possibly South Africa. Thank you for joining us today, and we do appreciate everyone being here. Thank you for your likes, shares, and subscribes. Of course, that gives us some endorphins, and it helps other people find 5 a.m. podcasts. So let's roll that intro.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate the intro. It was very nice.
Yes, my pleasure. James, good sir. Welcome to the 5 a.m. podcast.
I'm excited to be here, Michael. Thank you.
Yes, I am too. Listening to some of the other podcasts you've done and going over to your website, you've got a lot of great stuff. You're a busy man with figuring this out. And I noticed that you describe yourself as being on the crazy spectrum, but with profound information. And so what first led you to connect? Was it your military background with acting and techniques, or was it something else?
Actually, it goes all the way back to the beginning for me. It goes back to when I was 4 years old. When I was 4 years old, my parents took me to midnight mass. And when they took me to midnight mass, for whatever reason, the priest's words clicked. When he got to talking about eternity, kingdom will have no end, the life without end, it freaked me out because I realized there wasn't an end. If there's no end, there could be no middle. That means it's just a perpetual beginning. And if it's the perpetual beginning, that means like 10,000 eons from now, I'm still going to exist. And what freaked me out was the idea, it wasn't the scope of time. It was understanding that at some point I would do everything. And once I do, what do I do with the rest of eternity? I just, go insane with boredom. So that led me to regress myself. And like I said, I was a toddler at the time, but I regressed back into my mind and I instinctually treated it like a computer. I started creating programs for myself. And my two earliest were the most important ones were my suits and bubbles. My suits were just different versions of me. So whenever I met someone, I would actively listen to them, draw them in as best I could, and recreate them as a version of myself so I could better understand them and see the world through their eyes. My bubbles were essentially like the holodeck in the Star Trek universe. It could be anytime, any place, anywhere in the world. And what I didn't realize, what I was essentially creating was a proving ground for myself. So anytime I needed to walk into any scenario, any situation, I would pop a version of me into a bubble in my head and go through that situation multiple times till I found the best answer for me. As I progressed through there, it became a little difficult because, I was asking questions that none of the adults around me wanted to answer. So I started frustrating people. My first touch with theater, I guess, would be fast forwarding to high school. It was my freshman year. I went to Theater 1. I didn't last long. I got kicked out and put into ROTC. And I feel like that kind of helped push me down to the Marine Corps path. I wanted to go to the Marine Corps beforehand, but it kind of solidified it. So I got into the Corps, did 5 years active, 1 reserve. When I got out, at the time I was born in Jersey. When I was 10 years old, my parents moved us to Alabama. So when I enlisted, I was in Alabama. And that's where I came back to, my home of record. And I was working in a restaurant in Huntsville, Alabama. And I just remember we were sitting there rolling silverware after a shift, and there was a girl, one of the coworkers, and she was talking to another coworker about how hard her voice lessons were. And I was just a dumb honorary Marine, and I was like, "Come on, girl, man, you want to talk about hard? Man, I was a Marine. I can tell you about hard." And then she just popped up on me, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I bet you couldn't do 3 weeks, soldier boy." And her intensity got me, and I was like, "No, now I got to prove myself now." She called me out in front of everybody. I was like, "Yeah, I'll do 6 weeks." So I went out and found a voice coach, and after the first lesson, I kind of forgot about the challenge because I was so fascinated by the way he handled me, the way he could make me sound. I sounded, palpable. And then it allowed me to get into a chorus that got me into a musical. And then it just snowballed for the 2003 to 2005. I picked up about 30 different credits across a professional opera, improv, just all kinds of stuff, independent films. And that propelled me to go to New York. So I moved to Manhattan, lived there for 2 years, and I ended up writing my play, Two Tablespoons of Crazy. And the significant thing about that was from the moment I wrote the first line till the night we closed the production, only 5 months had passed. And a lot of people were like, "How did you do that so fast? You had no idea what you were doing."
Right. Right.
And the answer was I didn't have any of because I didn't know what I was doing. I had none of the boundaries, none of the limitations. I didn't know what I couldn't do. So I
Right.
just kept going for step in front of me. And that effort got me an audition for the film Hunger. And that was my first principal role in an acting film, or SAG film, rather. And I was working opposite of the scene. Lyndon Aspey, he played Johnny Cage in the 1990 Mortal Kombat film. I loved that. But he was on camera, I wasn't. And when they yelled cut, he reached over and shook my hand like I pulled his kid out of a fire. And I couldn't
Wha-
understand why at first. Yeah, it blew my mind. It took me several weeks, even after the production wrapped, but essentially, what had happened was in situations like that, where you have one actor off screen and one actor one on screen and one off screen, the one off screen doesn't put everything into the lines, so yada 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 the lines because they're not on screen, they don't care. But as an actor in a scene, you have to care because you're giving to your scene partner. I
Yes.
wasn't in character, but I was present in the moment. Thus, I was giving to Lyndon. And if you give to your other actor, you make their work better. So he looked better on camera for what I did. That's why he shook my hand. But the significant thing is that's when I realized that my suits were just characters. My bubbles were a version of Stanislavski's Magic If, and everything I'd been doing for my lifestyle was essentially what actors are doing. And more than that, it was teachable. That's when I started going into the school systems and I started teaching this. And I taught it for a year, four different classes, 15 hours a week. And after the year was over, I mean, the teachers were blown away. The kids got a lot better. They couldn't believe how fast they got, like kids who were completely shy in the middle of the stage, just, pounding it out. And then the superintendent called me up and he was like, "Yeah, man, you're doing a great job. We want you to take on 2 more schools, but we still can't pay you," because they didn't pay me for that whole thing. It was volunteer. Yeah, because I mean,
Gotcha.
I'm a high school dropout. I don't have credentials. I have street knowledge.
Right.
So I knew that, and that's why I made a deal with them. But I was under the standing, if I give you this year, I got to get something back eventually. But I can't give you a second year, take on 2 more classes for free. I can't live like that. So I got out of that. And then that's when I wrote the book, All Your Best Selves. And then after I wrote the book, it's maybe a couple of years past, but it was when I started doing the podcast. But it was when I started doing the podcast, and it happened really quick because like maybe the first 3 to 5 is when I realized what I'm actually peddling here is mental and emotional literacy. Because the thing is, I had nobody to talk to about it beforehand. Once I started doing podcast interviews, I'm talking to a human being back and forth, and then it opened it up. And I also realized not only that, but this is also emotions as a new sense. Because if you think about what does your eyes do? They detect shape and light. What does your nose do? Detect chemicals in the air. What do your fingers do? Detect tactile sensations, pressure. Well, if you gain emotional regulation, you become an empath. If you become an empath, when you walk into the room, now you're detecting emotional energy because
Yeah.
emotions are just flavored energy. So once you step into the room, it's like empaths do. They can feel whether it's a good energy, bad energy, whatever the vibe is, and they can make a choice based off that. So not only is it mental and emotional
Yes.
literacy now, it's a new sense. And that's kind of how I got
Yeah.
here.
Right. Almost an aspect of super soldier that might come in handy of just being able to really not just read the room, but read the emotions within the room.
Huh?
So I've got to ask you about your book, All Your Best Selves. This really explores kind of that fascinating intersection between acting and personal growth. What prompted you to write this book? And I got to also ask kind of what's that core message that you hope readers take away from it?
Well, it's kind of with the title because it's going against that mentality of people saying, I got to be my best self. I'm working on my best self. Well, I'm making the argument that there's no version of you, no matter how good it is, that's going to fit for every situation or circumstance you're in. It's like, the clothes you're wearing. There's no set of garments you're going to wear that's going to be perfect for everything. I wouldn't wear a tuxedo at the beach, maybe for a wedding, but outside of that, no.
Yes, of
Well, what
course.
I'm saying is if you grow and develop multiple versions of yourself that have a different mental and emotional paradigm,
Yeah.
now you have this wardrobe that you can step in and out of when you're going into the moment. So you can pick which version of you fits best in the moment. So you're changing for the moment instead of trying to force the moment to change for you. So
Yeah.
it's giving you more control, because trying to change the moment is an illusion of control. You think you can control, wrestle the moment to do what you want. It's alpha males do it all the time, but all it does is hurt others. Yeah, they might wrestle it for them, but how many people they screw along the way? So what I'm saying is if you learn how to adapt and change, now you can serve the moment much better than you were before. As for the reason I wrote the book was just to get the message out. Because like I said, I tripped over this, I didn't steal fire from the gods. I don't know who stole fire from the gods. They just dropped it on the floor and I tripped over it. But I was just smart enough when I picked it up to realize what it was. So once I realized I failed during my endeavor in the school system, that's when I started writing the book to try to get it out there that way. So now it's just pounding the ground with it.
Right. Well, it's really smart. And I know that you frequently reference Konstantin Stanislavski.
Yes,
And so he basically revolutionized acting, correct?
correct.
Yeah. And so can you explain maybe how his approach shifted that acting from pretending to becoming? And is there a reason why this distinction matters to people, even outside of acting?
Absolutely. Basically, if you look at the 2,500 years of Western acting going all the way back to the ancient Greeks, the first 2,100 years is roughly what people think acting is: masking, representation, pretending. The 300 years that followed moved into like the Victorian area. I mean, I'm crunching.
Sure. No, that's
Yeah,
cool.
there's a lot
That's
more that's
good.
going on. I'm just
Yeah.
crunching it. But the
Yeah.
Victorian Shakespearean area, it moved into realism and naturalism. But in 1900 ish, with the advent of Konstantin Stanislavski, this Russian guy, and the thing is, he was an aristocrat with a lot of money. That's very unique for an actor. He was
Okay.
allowed to have his own incubator. He made all the rules. And basically, when he got into this little bubble that he was in, creating his plays, doing it I mean, it's authoritarian, but, artistically, he started experimenting, I guess you could say. And when he was creating his art, essentially, he created his form. It was about, instead of acting, because acting isn't the right term. We still call it acting, but it's really not the right term. We're not acting anymore. It's about becoming someone else, living truthfully in imaginary circumstances. Because honestly, actors live more truthfully than non-actors do, because we're taught how to live truthfully. It's just actors live truthfully in imaginary circumstances.
Yeah,
So
interesting.
that's the rub.
Yeah.
So basically, he got out there, he made this system up, and it wasn't a perfect right off the bat, because one issue happened. Have you ever heard of method acting?
Yeah, absolutely.
Method acting is the American form of acting that came about in 1933 with the group
Okay.
theater. Lee Strasberg, Stella Adler, Sanford Meisner. And the problem was, well, actually, Stanislavski had 3 books by his end. There were the prominent books, the ABCs of acting, but only the first book was out when the group theater formed. So when Lee Strasberg got the group together and they were working on Stanislavski's, and they were in America, he was in Russia, so they hadn't met him. They're
Okay.
just secondhand
Right.
trying to figure out his work. Excuse me. Well, they came up with emotional recall. Emotional recall, essentially, if something traumatic happened to you and it's in the scene, we'll go back to that trauma and draw it up for the scene. But no, psychologically, that's a terrible advice. You don't want to do
Yeah.
that.
Right.
Stella Adler recognized that and she was like, no, this ain't good. So she went to Paris, where Konstantin Stanislavski was at the time, and started
Okay.
training with him. And they
Wow.
came up with the idea of like, no, we'll go to the imaginative. So you create an imaginative trauma that's not connected to your life. That way you can experience that trauma without hurting yourself. Also, because she was saying that you can never, and this is true, you can never have the same life experiences that you can in the imaginative. You can always imagine far more in life than you can actually live. So, because I mean, I'm not a millionaire. I can imagine being a millionaire, but it's a lot harder to be a millionaire. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's like the
absolutely.
imaginative is a safer place to go. It's kind of like the mirror universe in the Doctor Strange world.
Yes.
It's a place you can create that's protected, that you can't do damage outside of it. So you can do damage inside, but when you're done, you close. It doesn't matter anyway. So basically, that's how they got there, and like I said, it just evolved from there, and now it's gotten so deep to the point where it's about just like I said, you're using real emotions in imaginary circumstances. You're building a real working human mindset for the
Yeah.
stage, and
Yeah.
I'm just arguing, why are we working so much harder to build imaginary people than real people? Because the rub is we don't have a mind and emotions for the stage and one for real life. What these because I'll say this, if you look how act or artists work, like glass workers work with glass,
Yeah.
metal workers work with metal, musicians with instrument composition. Actors, their marble is the human mind and emotions. So what Stanislavski, Stanford Meisner, Uta Hagen did, they created the hammers, the chisels, and the scalpels, or the shapers for
Yeah.
that marble. That marble just happens to be
Right.
the human mind and emotions. So once we take those things into hand, we can shape our minds too. Because it's like we create these things for the character on the stage, but we talk about it in life all the time. Like in sports, you got to work hard, builds character. Don't lie. It'll mess with your character. Your reputation's
Yeah.
about
Right.
character. So we say
Yes.
that. So I'm saying these same tools will work on our character.
Yeah. Now, you've coined that term, the intangible toolbox. So, what tools could you tell us that are in this collection, and maybe how do they differ from traditional self-improvement approaches?
I'll give you one right off the bat. This is the Stanislavski system. It's 7 questions, and these 7 questions are designed. It's situational awareness, designed to ground you in the moment. Now, I always like to describe it like this. It's kind of like a submarine with sonar. A submarine's underground, can't see anything. It doesn't know what's going on. So it needs that sonar to send out a ping. That ping
Yeah.
bounces off something and it brings back information where the whales are, where submarines are, where the ground is, where surface vessels are. Well, these 7 questions do the same thing. And the point is, anytime you walk into any moment, any situation, send out this ping and it's going to bring back answers. And these answers are going to allow you to make better choices in the moment. And it's going to make far better choices than someone who never asked them. The 7 questions are this. Number one, who am I? This is the moment in relation to you. Number two, where am I? This is the moment in relation to the environment. Number three, when is it? This is the moment in relation to time. Number four, what do I want? This is the moment in relation to purpose. Number five, why do I want it? This is the moment in relation to desire. Number six, how do I get it? This is the moment in relation to action. And number seven, what's in my way? This is the moment in relation to obstacles. Like I said, these are life questions people forget to ask. If you ask your what, but you don't know why, somebody can hijack what you're doing because basically they can put your why in a place for you, and now you're doing their why. You're serving, building their dream. So you got to pay attention to those things because if we don't, it's like this: if you can't read and write, and someone hands you a contract, how do you know if you're being manipulated or not? Well, we live in a world where think tanks, the 1% billionaires, the ruling class are spending billions and upon billions of dollars to try to understand human behavior, how we think, how we act, so they can influence how we vote, how we buy. And the reason why they can do that is because we don't have mental and emotional literacy. Once we gain mental and emotional literacy, it'd be like reading. Now we can read the contract. Now red flags are going to pop up on all the people who are manipulating you because there's a lot out there we just don't know.
That's for sure. You're dropping bombs right over the target, my friend. But I got to ask you about this sounds like our intuition is something we kind of need to sharpen in this whole process. Can you talk a little bit about that innate intuition that we have and how we
Absolutely.
can use that?
Intuition, intent, I feel like everything in life is a learned skill.
Yes.
Being human is a learned skill. So intuition is just it's understanding what's going on around you. It's like if you've never it's like a cop with gut feelings. They're not just born with this gut feeling. They've been on the beat. They've walked these streets. They've met people again and again and again. And it's built up inside them, that gut feeling, which is what we refer to as intuition. It's just that knowing what's going on around you, situational awareness. But again, it's like going to the gym. If you go to the gym 6 days a week, you're going to be, diesel. You know, if you work out your mind all the time, if you're constantly thinking like this, you're gonna be a lot sharper. You're gonna think a lot quicker. Like people tell me I think very fast, but here's the reason why I think fast. there's a human phenomenon that we all kind of affect at some point in time. And it's like if you do a task, you're kind of sloppy at first, but if you do it repetitively, you get better. A prime example is like when you're driving a car. If you're driving a car when you were 16 years old, it's a little fudgy, you're slow, you might, get scared by a stop sign or something, whatever. But at some point in time, when you're driving to someplace you've been to a lot of times, you get there and you don't even remember the drive. You just show up
Yes,
there.
that's
Well,
right.
yeah, that's because that's your mind chunking parts together. It knows how to do it. It's using less energy and it's allowing you to do other things. So if you're having a busy
Yes.
day thinking, it's going to drive for you on autopilot. Well, instead of doing that, using that phenomenon on a task, I used it on my own personal Stanislavski system. I didn't use it on a task. I used it on the way I think. Thus, my brain started speeding up the way I thought. So now, like to where I'm at now, I have to slow down to get here because if not, I can just take off. But again, it's like I've spent 4 decades now building all these streams of thoughts, all these
Yeah.
processes inside myself that now it's what I am.
Right. And I know from my career in broadcasting, my wife would tell me when I'd come into a new crew or a new production environment, she'd be like, okay, slow down, slow down. There's the speed of Michael and there's the speed of other people. So just relax, mercy and grace. And this being able to become who we are, it takes tools, like you're saying, and you mentioned that there's these acting tools that can develop skills like presence, situational awareness, grit, and that emotional regulation, which I think emotional regulation is sadly missing, at least on social media, but in the real world. Can you walk us through how maybe one specific acting exercise develops one of these qualities?
Absolutely. There's several, but it's not so much an acting exercise as an acting tool, and that's
Gotcha.
scene work. Scene work is basically when you get two people together and you go over like the script you're working on. And I'll describe it like this: in the 1950s, there was this gentleman, Dr. Joseph Levy Moreno, who created psychodrama, which is now psychotherapy. It evolved into it. But what he did was take acting tools and techniques, put him into the group therapy session, and he started finding results. And what he said essentially was, it's good to have people in talk therapy. It works, but you don't get the same responses once you get your body involved. So once you get people involved with their traumas, with their issues, get their body into it, other things start popping out that they didn't even realize. So that was the tool that he needed to get these things to draw out of people. So that's what I'm saying is like these tools and techniques, they allow us to get a better grasp of who we are because they're allowing us to use parts of ourselves we don't normally use. It's kind of
Yes.
like when they say like how swimmers use more muscles than everyone. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's that
Right.
same understanding. It's like these are muscles that we've never worked out before because we've never
Yeah.
had the tools for them. We've never had the
Yeah.
need to. But now that we have them, when we start working out, it's going to open us up.
Yes.
Another one is the Meisner technique. The Meisner technique is repetition. And this goes against the Stanislavski system in a way because the Stanislavski system is inside out acting. You build from the inside and work out. Outside in acting is what Meisner and also a gentleman named Wulfswald Meyerhold, his technique is outside in.
Okay.
It's where you start from the outside and build in. And the reason being, and Meisner's very simple and it seems nonsensical. It's repetition. So, like I would say, you're wearing a white shirt with checkered patterns. And you would
Yeah.
repeat, I'm wearing a white shirt with checker patterns. I would say, you're wearing a white shirt. When we would just repeat back and forth like that, sounds nonsensical. But the point is to take your mind off the words. Don't focus on the words. I want to focus on you. I want to focus on your behavior, on external stimuli, because I'm teaching myself how to read these things. That's the point. It's like the Karate Kid. Daniel didn't understand
Yes.
why am I painting the fence? Why am I waxing the car? No, you're learning techniques. It's just
Yeah.
hidden under something else.
That's right.
So that's how these things work. Like Kung Fu, it's this beautiful dance, but it's lethal. So now when you start exercising these things, they will start popping out with you.
Right. Yeah. Similar to Tai Chi. That's one of the ones I like.
Absolutely.
Is that those fluid moments that if I remember anything from my, let's see, martial arts that I've done in the past, every strike is a block and every block is a strike or something like that.
Hmm.
It took a little bit to get through the thick skull, but so much fun. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is like a little call to action for you to put something in the comments. And I'm not doing this very gracefully. I'm just blunt and saying, if you're picking up what James is laying down, why don't you message in the the comments acting or something, an experience that you had where you realize you might have biffed it, maybe you knocked it out of the park, and you're thinking back and saying, I could have probably used some skills that James is talking about. And so while you're thinking about what to write in the comments, James, how can our listeners get in touch with you?
A couple different ways. My website is www.tbcenterprises.com. That's TBC like Tango Bravo Charlie. On my social media is Soy Candy, SOICANDIE. And I have a Facebook, YouTube,
Nice.
LinkedIn, what else? TikTok, Instagram, Blue Sky.
Awesome.
And yeah, if you want to check out my book, it's on Amazon.com. You can get a link from my website, but it's All Your Best Selves, How the Performing Arts Toolkit Can Help You Place Anytime, Anywhere with Anyone.
It sounds so fascinating. So, for somebody that might be skeptical about the idea that acting techniques could improve their life, what would be your most compelling evidence or example that you could share with us?
Well, there's quite a few because, like, when I started research, because before I did the book, I thought this was just an idea I tripped over. Once I
Yeah.
started doing the book, I started finding a lot. There's like pockets of scientists all over the country that have been doing this trauma drama. Again, it's what they do is they've been taking teens who've dealt with trauma and they're reverse engineering healing, is that's what I call it. So,
Okay.
like, if a kid dealt with trauma, they're not going to, go to that trauma they dealt with. They're going to go to another trauma, and going through that trauma, they're getting these kids the tools and techniques to deal with trauma. Once they have those tools and understand
Yeah.
it, they could take it
Right.
to their own trauma and work through it without having to run through their trauma. There's also a sense theater that deals with kids with autism. The way it works is it's kind of like pulls the curtain back on life. Kids with autism have trouble seeing the end. They have trouble seeing social cues. So what they'll do is they'll explain how society works in a sense so that kids know how it works. They know how the game is played so they don't have to pick up on other players' cues.
Gotcha.
There's also, like in prisons, there was a film that just came out called Sing Sing that talks about it. Back in the 1970s, there was a kid named Miguel Pinheiro who went in for armed robbery, and while in, he wrote this play called Short Eyes, which became a Tony. I think it was nominated for a Tony, didn't actually win. But the whole point is that they found out that these prisoners who were locked up were changing. Like they found ways to regulate their aggression. They weren't so volatile because they had an outlet for it now. And it begs the question: what if these guys had found this art before they found their crime? Would they have taken another road? And like I said, there's a lot of science. The thing is, all the science is helping broken people. All I'm saying is, like, let's push it a step further. Instead of waiting till people are broken, let's teach them before. Because here's one thing: if we're at the point where we're teaching actors how to use real emotions in imaginary circumstances, how to regulate like that, why aren't we giving those same techniques to elementary school kids before they hit adolescence and they get swamped with emotions?
Yeah.
We have the answers, we're just not giving it to them. And
Right.
if we look at the world, when we gave the world written literacy in the form of reading and writing, changed the world. When we gave the world numerical literacy in the form of mathematics, changed the world. I'm just making the argument, why wouldn't it change the world if we gave humanity a twofer, mental and emotional literacy?
Yeah, right. Right. So this makes me think of while you and I talked briefly about your time in the Corps, and we're assessing the situation. We have to learn a way to manage. We have to learn a way to assess. So does that ring any bells for you, or maybe cause you to think of, yeah, there was a point where I was learning to assess, and then I was learning to how to operate within that, and maybe that goes back to your suits and bubbles.
Absolutely. Something the Marine Corps does pop up. It's a different saying, but it's
Okay.
the 7 Ps.
Okay.
But it's kind of the same thing. The 7 Ps: proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance.
Yeah. There
So
you go.
it's about understanding the situation beforehand. Make
Yes.
make proper choices before you get into the fight. So when you're in the fight, you're not running around like a chicken with your head cut off.
Yes.
So yeah, rooted in the same place. It's that understanding of the situation, but it does help you. But it's like civilians, because that's the thing is, it's a quote that I love. It's on the back of my book. I used to think it was a modern military quote, but I didn't
Okay.
realize it goes back 2,500 years to this Greek lyrical poet named Archiliakos. And it's like, we don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training. And that's the difference. As a Marine, I received training. Regular civilians, they don't get training. We go through high school and we go through the same education system that essentially creates the same individual. We're not creating people to be unique, to follow their own personal destinies. First of all, like, if we really cared about education, when we broke kids up into groups of 30, we like, okay, those 30 are audio learners, put with an audio teacher. Those 30 are practical learners, put them with a practical teacher. Find out how they learn and put them with a teacher that teaches that way. We would have much better progress, because I was a terrible student, but I was an awesome learner. I just wasn't allowed to learn the way I learned. I'm a mover. Like, when I'm
Yes.
learning, I need to be walking around. So that way it's just how my mind processes. Like, when I first started writing, I had to put a treadmill up to a chest of drawers with a laptop up top so I could pace while I was typing, because that's just where I was. I couldn't sit down and write.
Yeah. Right. And that caused me to think of my friend Todd. I think it was ninth grade. And I think I was a really good learner, but a terrible student. And Todd was like, well, Michael, all you have to do is memorize the answers. That's it. It's like the best students memorize the best. And that's all you need to do. And I was like, oh man, I hate memorization. But I realized, okay, so I have to learn how to memorize the right answers to the tests. And wouldn't it be nice to be able to have a different way of learning or teaching the learners how to learn, perhaps?
Absolutely. Because
But yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, the thing about memorizing, I get what he's saying, but all that's doing is making you compliant to the system.
That's
That's not
correct.
teaching you how to think. You're not gaining critical thinking skills. You're not becoming your authentic self. You're just a cog in the wheel at that point. So these when you once you learn mental and emotional literacy, you're writing the code now. It's not someone else, the school system, the state, or anyone else plugging this information, telling you what to think, what to feel. Now you're the one in the driver's wheel. And that's why it's so important to me, because now you're in a position where you get to call the shots in your life. And that's how it should be, because that's how you get to be authentic. That's how you feel fulfilled, when you're making the choices. Like, consider this: most people have insecurities in the acting world. Insecurity, that's stage fright. And we know how to get past stage fright. All getting past stage fright is not knowing your beats, not knowing your moments, not knowing your line. It's not knowing. That's the same thing people have insecurity. They don't know the environment they're in. They don't know the people they're in. They don't know the stuff they're talking about. Once you answer the questions, you fill everything in inside of you. You start self-actualizing, and that insecurity goes away, because why do you need to feel insecure? You know it. I mean, do you ever feel insecure talking about, like, you're saying your name? No, because you know it. When people are talking about their families, they're not insecure because they know their families.
Right.
It's about knowing. So if you feel insecure about anything, ask yourself, what don't you know about what you're feeling insecure about?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That's like a perfect way to put it. And so is this like that hypercode switching that you talk about?
Well, actually, hypercode switching is because code switching is basically just changing.
Okay.
I've evolved to the point where I've referred to it as spiritual shapeshifting at this point. But
Okay.
hypercode switching is basically just changing mentally and emotionally to fit where you are, or just changing in general, just being able to change who you are.
Yeah.
Like, and again, it's not a facade, it's not a fake, because that's what sociopaths and psychopaths do. They
Yes.
mask, they put representations of who they are on. I'm saying that's not enough. You have to live through it. You have to experience these versions of yourself, because that's the only way you can become them. You have to put them on, walk out in the streets, talk to people around with this mentality, and see how they react to you under these circumstances of who you are in the moment, because
Yeah.
that's how you grow yourself.
Yeah. So many good spiritual principles, because it seems to me like you're taking what everybody thinks is that physical facade, and you're saying, no, no, ladies and gentlemen, there's a whole spiritual force behind this.
And it's much
And
bigger.
yeah, much bigger than what we see. And so we hear, well, a computer term. What do I know about computers but where the switch is and the plugs are? But what you see is what you get, that whole WYSIWYG idea. And you're saying, no, there's so much more than that. And man, this time has just flown by. We've had such a great conversation. And I know we have to wrap up, but I want to remind our listeners that James has generously provided resources to help you on your own journey. Any final thoughts for us, James, as we're wrapping up?
Honestly, I'd say in this point in time, especially in the state of the union, how the country's going, the most important thing you can do is be curious,
Yeah.
because there's so much misinformation. And just one thing about misinformation, and this is something that's really important we need to understand.
Yes.
There's no misinformation that I've ever seen that would survive the scrutiny of a high school level research paper that I was taught. So
Right.
that means the only reason fake news exists is because tens of millions of Americans either cannot or will not do high school level work.
Yeah.
That's on us. We have to do the work. We have to be curious enough, because if we do, we see through the veil, and that's
Yes.
what's going to free us.
That's right. And getting out of the red team, blue team paradigm
Yeah,
and
because they're
realizing
both, the left and the right's attached to the same body. That's what we have to
it's
realize.
exactly right. That bird has two wings, a left one and a right one.
Mhm.
And it's like we're getting pooped on by this political bird, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, we cannot forget the whole idea of black mirrors and Lake Diana. Look that up in Italy, ladies and gentlemen, about where they made the sacrifices to the goddesses in that but not just that. So we're looking at those because we have the black screens everywhere, but it's called television, ladies and gentlemen. They're telling a vision. So we can write our visions, we can make them plain, and we can run with that. So thank you so much, James, for the tools that you've talked about and given us. Love hearing your insights. So thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It was a great time.
Oh, yeah, loved it. So, ladies and gentlemen, I said, there you have it. I'll say it again. Little redundancy. Drive that point home. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We absolutely love and appreciate that you joined us in this conversation. As I often say, it's like we're sitting in a diner. And as you do, you eavesdrop on the people behind you. I mean, it just happens. Don't share your secrets in a diner, ladies and gentlemen. But if you haven't already, absolutely share this out with some friends that are family members, maybe someone in your network that you know, man, they're going to dig this conversation. Yes, they will. James and I will concur. They will dig this conversation. So send this link over to them and just make their day, make our day with a 5-star review at 5ampodcast.com. And I do want to thank those who have ventured over to buymeacoffee.com/5ampodcast. We do appreciate your participation in what we're working here to do at 5am Podcast. I'm Michael Klassen. Make sure you enjoy those sunrises and sunsets. Thanks for being here, and thanks for sharing.